when you have people who already have a lot of power but are dissident in their mind, so like elite Exeters, what should they be doing, and what should Exeters be doing? Like, in what way can we kind of start this detachment?
Well, there's no what they should be doing is what they're doing right now, which is another term for this that was frequently used in the 19th century was internal exile. So they behave like an expat, even though they're still living there. And of course they basically live in the closet, and I would certainly advise anyone who's in the closet to stay there and delete your tweets while you still can. There's much to be said for the closet. When you come back to exit, voice, and loyalty, the essential problem is that there's really no exit from a global empire, not in the literal sense of the word. I have friends who are like, I want to move to Hungary. I'm like, Hungary is maybe where Franco's Spain was in 1975, 1970, something like that. Maybe even 1960, maybe even 1960. The idea that Hungary will stay this national populist, kleptocracy that it is, for another 20 years, I would say is preposterous. And then you'll see a complete cultural revolution there, and everything associated with the old regime will be very aggressively and rapidly destroyed. Look at what's left of Franco's Spain, right? Some architecture. So in a way, there's no real exit from a global state. The answer is actually pretty simple, in my opinion, which is that you have to stop thinking of political change as an incremental process. Your model of, let's do some little thing and then we'll do some bigger thing and so on, is a model that derives from many, many centuries of leftist revolutionary experience. During all of these centuries, the same formulas have been tried in reverse, and they have never worked. Because there's a fundamental asymmetry there. You're, I assume, familiar with the concept of entropy and extropy. If I throw a glass up in the air, and it falls on the floor, it'll smash. But if I sweep the pieces up and throw them up in the air, they will not come together and land on the counter as a glass. Essentially when people try to reverse the processes of leftism or apply those lessons which they see working to the right, and this affects everything from like passive resistance to terrorism to everything in between. None of it ever works. Your demonstrations, good luck with that. So one of the tropes of like when you look at entropy in the real world, you see that there are two broad forms of entropy. There's a fast form and a slow form. Fast entropy is like a fire. Slow entropy is like rust. And what's interesting is that you see both of these phenomena in a political context as well. So fire is like revolution. Rust is like basically decadence. And so, America is pretty rusted out as a vehicle in a lot of different ways. But it still could catch fire a little bit. It doesn't seem, it's very, what you see is generally the rust is in, the sort of countries, it's a little like Dutch elm disease, where the Chinese elms are adapted to it, but the Western elms are not. So basically it's rust in the source of the infection and fire when it basically spreads. So that's why basically Anglo-American rust really, Anglomania to a substantial extent creates the French Revolution, because they're like, oh, why don't we have a constitutional democracy just like England? Then, a century and a half later in Russia, they're like, oh, that worked out really well for France. But so when you look at sort of rust versus fire, In both cases, you're seeing this increasing disorder. And both of these are processes that are not reversible processes. And so when you think about it, do you have any kind of a math background? Have you done much? Totally fine. So, for those with a math background, there's something called an integral, which you're probably aware of, which is just the area under a curve. Everybody probably had to look at that at some point. And when you measure basically the impact of leftism, what you're measuring is basically the height of the curve is like how much shit are they disrupting, and what they get done, their actual productive work is the area under the curve. So a lot of people, when they think about opposing leftism, reverse that and say, let's do something that will create a bunch of area under the curve. Let's basically cause some trouble for them. That will increase our capacity to cause more trouble. Just like a little bit of fire causes more fire, a little bit of rust on your car causes more rust. Somehow rust has this process where it spreads like cancer, even though it's not alive. And so they sort of operate on that basis, that basically doing small things is good because small things add up. That is a very, very bad way to think for their opponents, because order is a very different thing from disorder. And when you want to create order, what you're looking at is basically always a situation in which this is done all at once. So actually, when you're thinking about, sort of the benchmark for success in a political sense, you're not thinking about the area under the curve. You're thinking about the peak value of the curve. If you dissipate, you're basically your energy system is more like a capacitor and less like a battery. What you're doing is charging it for a spike. And in your spike, everything has to work just right. And you basically only get one chance. Your shit is already burned out. In a sense, like, one of the things you'll note about American history is that this is actually done about every 75 years. So you're a Brit. You probably know some American history because you're really American. You've been a colony for quite some time. One of the things that really shocked me as a kid, I spent some time in Cyprus where I got 2 years of basically faux British public school education in the English school in Nicosia, and I was shocked when I shouldn't have been shocked, but I was shocked that basically the British version of the American Revolution was the same as the American version. It was that the Americans were right. And I was like, wait, shouldn't I, I'm in the Commonwealth here. Shouldn't I be getting the British side of the story? Of course I was not. That's because it's the true side. In any case, in American history, one of the things you see that essentially every 75 years, the United States is a monarchy. Every 75 years, the United States sees a president who's actually in charge of the executive branch. So these presidents are, as you would probably guess, Washington, with basically Alexander Hamilton actually doing the work, Lincoln, with his secretaries Hay and Nicolay actually doing the work, and FDR with Harry Hopkins and Harold Ickes actually doing the work. None of these guys were actually really managers in a sense, but they were certainly monarchies. And FDR can create and destroy agencies. He can basically get huge public works programs going in 3 months. There's this wonderful I don't know if I'm up for a performance right now, but I sometimes do it, where I just read the last 10 paragraphs of FDR's inaugural address. Now, bear in mind, this is taking place in 1933. Year you've probably heard of. And FDR basically says in this inaugural address, I'm going to paraphrase loosely, look, everything is fucked. If Congress, can do anything good, great. Otherwise, I'm going to need absolute power, and I'm going to need it now. and I'm responsible only to God. And that is not quite the way in which he governs, but it's reasonably close to the way in which he governs. And of course, this is a monarchy like any monarchy. It's not it's a monarchy of the whole American people, or at least it's a class sandwich, because FDR is, of course, from the very highest social class. He's really a born aristocrat. He's like if Trump was a little bit smarter and he was from the most fashionable people in the world. That's kind of his talent level. And he's, of course, appealing to the masses who are out of work. And so that basically squishes kind of the old bourgeois elite, just like in a vise, and creates the power structure we have today. So, I mean, he's very much a politician, but he's also completely running the government. Like, he's basically the CEO of Washington, D.C. So that's not quite, and one of the things, there's this great line in his inaugural address. He's like, what I will need to meet this crisis is the power of a general repelling an enemy invasion. He actually, imagine Trump came in and said that. One time I did this speech and people thought it was my original work, and man, people flipped out. Because he's basically like saying, yeah, okay, I'm going to need martial law here, or the economic equivalent of martial law, certainly. People actually knew what that meant at that time. And, obviously it was a very popular address. He was a very popular president. People were like, yeah, let's do it. Let's have the martial law. I think that now, the level of authority that FDR had would not be quite enough. I think you need sort of just more the power of the enemy general, which is basically absolute power. And until you're ready to do that, and until you're basically ready to make that delegation and essentially say, okay, I don't like the government that we have now. It's not working. It can't work. And so I'm going to basically find something else, which amounts probably basically to someone else, and give them that responsibility, because I'm convinced that they're going to do a better job than the thing that's there now. Until you're ready to make that commitment, don't do anything. Don't think anything. Because basically there's nothing else that you can do.